All right, y'all. So let's talk about this fight here real quick. Want to get my post-fight thoughts on this one here. Loopy Godinez taking on Julia Polastri. I had to go with Loopy in this one, just because of the experience level and just because of the polished skills as far as boxing and wrestling. And it pretty much went the way I felt it was going to go here. Loopy, I always think, she has enough skill set to beat some of these unranked fighters and handle them the way she does. But there's still some things that need to be worked on. But first off, I got to say, man, the past 3 weekends, these WMMA fights, they've been delivering. They've been the lower ranked fights, the lower level fights, but they all been delivering, man. We've been getting some good performances from like Sam Hughes versus Stephanie Luciano, uh, Alexa Thynera, exploding on the scene, taking Molly McCann out. A lot of good finishes, Carly Giudice and Dubin. So, and now this fight. So, I got to give these two credit just for, the performance they put on. But it turned out to be a good matchmaker. Good match. The matchmakers, they did good on this one here, man. Loopy's boxing style versus this high pressure striking style of Julia Polastri. I like how Loopy kind of took it back to basics in this fight. She stuck to her guns, stuck to her right hand, stuck to the better, sharper boxing, backing her opponent up. And when it called for it, she took her opponent down. DC, he was really like shocked at the power bomb, but people forget, like, Loopy, she used to be slamming people like this before. Like, Loopy kind of took it back to her roots whenever, before I used to say, can she come up like Andrade, be the next one to be slamming girls? But, like, this ain't the first time she power bombed somebody. Like, she used to do this in LFA, and I believe she did it a few times early on in the UFC where, she would pick girls up and slam them. So it was kind of a surprise to see Loopy take it back to, her, physical strength days. She been so hung up on her boxing, but this was the style that she needed to start, doing when she got into the UFC, was really just like strike her way in, then take her opponent down and just out wrestle him, because there really wasn't no need for Loopy to spin round after round or minute after minute, trying to strike with Julia Polastri and give her a chance. Because Julia Polastri, she can throw good kicks, front kicks, and good hard combinations, So it was good that Loopy was dictating the pace with her boxing. But when she got on the inside, like, she caught the leg, got the power bomb in the first round. And then after that, she took Julia Polastri down hard again, So she was just, using a lot of good ground control time, but also strikes, to take the first round. And even the second round, the second round, she did box her way in, but then she would use her physical strength again to just like surprise and slam Julia Polastri around and just keep her in that half guard and, get a few shots in from the side control. But what I like about Polastri is she is pretty active off her back. She just needs to work on like her hips, get in that position where she can buck and, get her opponent off. Because after that second takedown in the first round, she did crack Loopy with, I believe it was like an elbow, and Loopy let her up. When Loopy let her up, I was like, oh, okay, yeah, I think she was worried about that activity off of Julia Polostri's back, so she had to be careful of that. But the third round, of course, we all saw what happened there. Loopy kind of got winded, from all the takedowns and clinch work. And I think, like, the mental was getting a little bit cracked because Julia Polastri was walking through a lot of these shots. I think Loopy was probably like, dang, this girl walking through my best right hand and my left hook. And Julia Polastri was just like shaking them off like, all right, I ate that. Then she came back with her own right hand, her own combination, started backing Loopy up and hurting Loopy. So I think it was like a mixture of, Loopy gassing, but also mental gassing, like physically gassing, but mental gassing when you see the person you're trying to chip away at just, eat your shots like little snacks or something. She was just eating these shots. Like, I don't recommend fighters eating shots like that, but it was crazy how Julia Polastri was just walking through these shots. She was just walking through them and, like, coming back with her own and hurting Loopy at the same time. So I give the third round to Julia Polastri, off of significant damage and pressure, and just off of that. Like, the numbers were pretty close, but since her shots were doing more damage to Loopy and she was walking through them, I had to give it to her, So, yeah. Loopy did all right, though. She won the first 2 rounds with her boxing and wrestling. Polastri, again, proved that she's one of the toughest, like, up-and-coming strawweights. This girl is tough. She can fight. She just really needs to round out her striking IQ. Don't just worry about pressure and trying to take punches. But I think she needs to be a little bit more methodical with her shots and her takedown defense. So a little bit of work needs to be done there. Loopy, though, this was just a good anchor point for her, to just keep her ranking where she's at. But I still think, Loopy needs to really work on her defense. It's very leaky. That's why her nose is leaking all the time. She really needs to, like, I think she really needs to work on her pacing too. Like, she's a good wrestler, but sometimes by the third round, she's gassing. So I really don't see her as like a 5-round fighter yet, or even like a high gas tank fighter or a good intensity fighter that can keep going and going and going, round after round. So I think she needs to really work on her pacing and, stop taking a lot of shots. I think her boxing is good, her offensive boxing, but defense needs work. Defense really needs work. And, the wrestling is good. I think that's something she just needs to, continue to work on throughout her career, just her career, her next training camp. But I think her and Ebos would be a good fight. Maybe fight the loser of Jillian Robertson and Marina Rodriguez. I just still need to see a few things from her. Or if they want to reschedule that Sam Hughes fight, that's a good one. I think Sam could get that fight. That's a good one for both of them. Eventually, I'd like to see a rematch with her and Demopoulos too. Her and Demopoulos, they went toe to toe in their fight back in LFA. So we'll see, y'all. But other than that, like, I didn't see any championship material in this fight or any contender material. I just saw a good fight. So as long as these ladies keep on bringing these good fights the next few weeks, hey, I'm happy. But what did y'all think of the fight? Combo Breaker 99. I'm out. Subscribe. Peace.